clarification for Senior Minister Teo on the standards expected of our ministers. I must say that I find it disappointing that he reduces the issue of conflict of interest into a legal argument. I mean, in the Code of Conduct for Ministers, it's stated quite clearly at the bottom of the document that the document does not have the force of law, and whether there's a breach or not is not justiciable in a court of law. So, does he agree with me that actually the Code of Conduct embodies the highest standards expected of our ministers in their conduct of their public affairs, and it should not be the subject of legal arguments or technicalities? The second clarification on a related point is, if one looks at para 3.2 of the Code of Conduct, it is stated very strictly, a minister therefore must never enter into any transactions where his private financial interests might, even conceivably, come into conflict with his public duty. So that is what is stated there. Never enter into transactions where his financial interests might conceivably come into conflict with his public duty. So does he agree that it might be reasonable to interpret this to mean that actually the law minister should not have entered into this transaction with the SLA, which is an agency under his charge, or at the very least, it was imprudent of him to do so?
Mr. Speaker, sir, Ms. Sylvia Lim is a lawyer as well. I explained to another lawyer earlier, Mr. Zulkarnain, what conflict of interest means. Two things must come together at the same time. And this is not a legal description. It also underpins what the understanding of conflict of interest is in the Code of Conduct. There must be some official power that you have over some matter, and that matter coincides with a personal interest of that person. Those two things must come together. There's an actual conflict of interest if the person with that duty, with those powers, uses them on a matter in which he has a personal interest. There's a potential conflict of interest if that person retains that power and there's a matter which is there, which is his personal interest, but no decision or action has yet been taken by that person. So that is removed. The potential conflict of interest is removed if the person removes himself from that duty. Ms. Sylvia Lim, sir, is a lawyer. I think she understands that. And so that is the import of what conflict of interest is about. And Mr. Shanmugam took steps to make sure that he removed himself from those duties and powers that he had over a matter which would have been a private matter, and therefore the two were separated. And one of those two factors which must exist for conflict interest to arise, which is that the person must have powers over that private matter, was removed. So that's very important. And I explained that earlier, and I hope that that will satisfy Ms. Sylvia Lim. And as I said, there are perceptions. But once the actual conflict of interest and the potential conflict of interest have been removed, that should dispel the perception of conflict of interest in any fair-minded person.